Thanks very much, David. And final question.
Hi. Two things. First, in Latin America, we have an experience. In Mexico, this country is a pioneer in this issue in Latin America. They have the Federal Institute of Access to Information, and anybody can request information to the government online. And I think this experience has been successful because people actually get information from the government. And other thing, have you considered the participation of the citizens in this, the access to information? I mean, not just related to the journalist work. I mean, have you considered promote the participation of the citizen?
I think when the Act was originally brought in, there was a civil service network and there was a citizens network that was originally, and there was a process set up whereby a citizens network and people would be head of a board of a citizens network for right to information advocacy and the practicalities of it. That's kind of disappeared 10 years ago. It doesn't really, it's already there. Although the public sector side of it does still exist, and FOI officers meet regularly to discuss what the processes under the Act are. I think I'd be all in favour. I wish that the €15 fee wasn't there. I think there'd be greater number of requests from the general public. I think journalists use it in a way sometimes to get stories, but also people also want to know what's happening down the street, and they want to know why is that changing, and who's benefiting from that process. And and I've seen that culture in the UK. I haven't seen it here so much. If that culture started to exist, it would be great. But I think one of the big barriers to it is the money, unfortunately. Sean,
well, like I say, our view is that there was a drop of as I said earlier, there's a drop of 60% in the use of FOI when the fees were brought in. So the Commission would certainly see that as a disincentive for people to use the Act.
Thank you very, very much. I'm going to take a lead from that last question in terms of some of my questions I'm going to present to the panelists now. The question I was going to present to Sean, if I could. If all of us in the room here, including all of us, were an army supporting Gavin in his FOI submissions and his requests, so if we were all FOIers, what do you think should be in our toolkit? What do you think are the skills that we should have and some of the good insights and nuggets of information that we could benefit from?
What you could benefit from, or how could you go about accessing what might be of benefit?
How I could go about accessing, how we could go about it.
Well, this is where I might disagree slightly with Gavin, is that in my experience, the process works quicker, and I would suggest better, where the requester can be surgical in what they seek. Very, very specific in what you seek, because that way it makes it more difficult for a public body to, for example, have search and retrieval, to quote volume and so on. And it means, as well as everything else, that in practical terms, a decision-making process should be much, much quicker. So that's one thing I would say. I would also say that if you are aware of what it is that the public body has done, then there certainly ought to be records of that. So if you have engaged on a service level with the public body, I think it's reasonable to expect that there ought to be records recording that service engagement, and there to pursue those records.
Okay, great, thank you very much. Question for Gavin. If you had a magic wand and you're able to give it to Sean, and he could then wave his magic wand all around his colleagues across public service in order to change their behaviour, change their culture, change their mindset, change their way of doing things, what do you think you'd want his magic wand to be able to do?
Can I interject on that? If I had a magic wand, what I would ask is I would ask people to be in some way pragmatic, in some way practical. Don't look at the exemptions of the FOI Act. Look at what the thing was set up to establish. What harm would there be if I released this record? And work backwards from that. Not saying, what basis can I find to exempt this record? Bring the thought process that was intended by the FOI Act to what it is that you do, not the reverse. So, sorry.
I entirely agree with that. I would have said the same thing. It's really that when it's about, I always have in mind what records exist, and I do, depending on the request, I try to be as precise as possible. The problem sometimes with being as precise as possible is that if you use one word and not another, some requesters will say, oh well, he's not looking for that, but they know what I'm looking for, but they will say, well, he's looking for this word, and what this word means is different to what I was looking for, and then therefore we're not going to release. So I always have in mind just what records exist as a result of the processes of government, and that's it. The Act is not a right to information, it's a right to records as such. And it's the records that accrue from that process that you have in mind and say, well, what meetings are involved? So when FOI officers are having meetings about FOI, can I get meeting minutes of that meeting? If just all these processes that happen and all this documentation and data is generated, it's having in mind first what records would exist around this, and then ringing an FOI officer and saying what records do exist around this and what processes exist, and then it's in a way it's not as some people think trawling. It's more trying to understand how records are held and how finding systems work, and then getting the information.
Okay, cool, very good. And Eoin, final question. We talked earlier on at the start, particularly about the current legislation that we have, how it compares internationally, and some of the suggestions and reforms that might take place. Aside from what those possible reforms might be, how would it be possible for us to build a bit of appetite for any future government or administration to have that on their agenda, to take on board some concerns that, for example, Gavin and even Sean might have?
Well, that's more a political question than a legal one. And at the moment, I suspect that most politicians do not have an appetite for freedom of information reform, given that large amounts of freedom of information has been directed against them. There are lots of little reforms that you could do, from reversing the 2003 amendments, or strengthening the duty to cooperate, or trying to define the legislative culture. But in the end, legislation only happens when people demand it. And if there isn't a major groundswell in favour of FOI amendment to make it easier for FOI to apply, then it's not going to happen.
Cool. Thank you very much. Any final closing points or remarks, or anybody like to add something to sum up for us?
Well, just from the point of view of, we're talking here about getting the information from various public bodies. What suggestions would you give to the public bodies to manage their information more accessibly? Because there was an issue there you were saying of getting hard copies of digital documents. And there would be an issue within an organisation of various different people having various levels of technical ability and access to people who have more levels of technical ability. What kind of suggestions would you give for that?
Well, I would echo something Gavin said earlier.
Listen to you, for example.
Yeah, like I do all my work on the screen, and it's all recorded in the soft version. So therefore, it's all there. We put it then on a communal system and so on. It's the same in every other public body. So it makes it much easier. It also makes it much easier to retrieve it if you want to look at it. So that's what everybody does this anyway. You're recording it. I don't write with pen. I write at the screen and I record it onto a communal system. So if somebody seeks records from us, then the choice is it's either you can have it in that version, or if you prefer a paper copy, I'll give you a paper copy. I simply don't understand why somebody would want to go through the process of photocopying a file when you have it all in your system.
And very briefly, Malachy, if we could.
Yeah, just in terms of the groundswell of pressure to make changes, in all of your opinion, how active has the media been in pressurising?
I would suggest that the media have been active in finding and in releasing records that they got through under FOI, and in that way showing what is available, what type of records are held, that puts a spotlight on what decisions are taken by public bodies, and therefore indirectly at least makes public bodies more accountable. However, as regards an actual groundswell to force government action to amend FOI one way or the other, I would agree with Eoin and say there would need to be a major shift in public opinion towards that, because bear in mind, even with the volume of requests, 14,000 last year, you're still talking about a tiny minority of the population who actually engage with FOI. So I don't see that groundswell opinion.
I don't see that.
And on that note, I think I'd like to say on behalf of TI, we've had a wonderful evening this evening. We'd love to be doing this again. We'd love to be doing another FOI, as well as on other topics and other issues and on other themes. Could I invite us to show our appreciation to our panellists?